For my glass castle passage analysis, I chose to do pages 246 through 248. I chose this passage because it stood out to me since it's her first impression of her new life in New York that she's always dreamed of, and it shows the contrast between Welch and New York, which I found pretty interesting. This passage occurs right after Jeanette meets Laurie at her work when she arrives in New York City, right before she signed up for public school, and they moved in, and she starts working for the Phoenix. The purpose behind this passage is that it establishes a new setting and a new stage in Jeanette's life, and contrasts the stability in New York with the increasing instability of Welch. The speaker is Jeanette Walls, in first person, and the audience is the reader as Jeanette tells us about her new life in New York City. First off, this whole passage is part of a frame narrative. I'm going to read my passage in sections so that it's easier to analyze. It starts on page 246, where it says, "Later, Laurie and I took the subway." Later, Laurie and I took the subway down to Greenwich Village and walked over to the Evangeline, a woman's hostel where she had been living. That first night I woke up at 3 a.m. and saw the sky all lit up in bright orange. I wondered if there was a big fire somewhere, but in the morning Laurie told me that the orange glow came from the air pollution, refracting the light off the streets and buildings. "The night sky here," she said, "always had that color. What it meant was that in New York you would never be able to see the stars. But Venus wasn't a star. I wondered if I'd be able to see it." The rest of the passage was continued up here. The motif in this paragraph is fire, which in this case is connected to the color orange. When Laurie talks about the orange glow in the sky that Jeanette notices that first night, it is when the motif comes up. The people that are described with these colors, meaning orange, or any of the colors related to fire really, as I've noticed, are the ones that overcame chaos, fear, and destruction. Fire is the chaos, fear, and destruction. Throughout her life, Jeanette has fought numerous fires or battles. There were several scenes in the book where she was caught with fire, and it ended up being a chaotic event, meaning where she was burned at the beginning of the novel, playing with fire and burning Tinkerbell's face. There was a fire in the house, a fire in the hotel, and numerous other things that I could not find. The symbolism of the fire is that she overcame terror, homelessness, starvation, and abuse. She fought fire with a fighting spirit, and just like when she burned herself as a child, she pulled through. On page 34, she says, "I lived in a world that at any moment could erupt into fire. It was a sort of knowledge that kept you on your toes." Over the rest of the passage, the rest of the paragraph, there is a symbolism of stars. When her dad gave them stars instead of presents because they didn't have anything that year. The stars symbolize that when everything is at their worst, then you can look at something for hope. Their dad didn't have anything to give them that year, so he showed his love and hope to them through giving them stars or planets. And these stars aren't visible in New York, which creates a sense of distress in Jeanette's life, even though she chooses to think that she can see Venus, which means that she believes in a brighter future in New York City. The very next day, I landed a job at a hamburger joint on 14th Street. After taxes and Social Security, I'd be taking home over $80 a week. I'd spent a lot of time imagining what New York would be like, but the one thing that never occurred to me was that the opportunities would come so easily. Aside from having to wear those embarrassing red and yellow uniforms and matching floppy hats, I loved the job. The lunch and dinner rushes were always exciting, with the lines backing up to the counter, the cashier shouting orders over the microphone, the grill guy shoveling hamburgers through the frame-broiling conveyor belt, everyone running from the fixings counter to the drink station to the infrared fries warmers, staying on the top of the orders, the manager jumping in to help whenever a crisis cropped up. We got 20% off our meals, and for the first week there, I had a cheeseburger and a chocolate milkshake every day for lunch. In the middle of the summer, Laurie found us an apartment in the neighborhood we could afford, the South Bronx. The yellow Art Deco building must have been pretty fancy when it opened up, but now graffiti covered the outside walls, and the cracked mirrors in the lobby were held together with duct tape. Still, it had what Mom called good bones. Our apartment was bigger than the entire house in Little Herbert Street, and way fancier. It had shiny oak parquet floors, a foyer with two steps leading down from the living room, where I slept, into the side, a bedroom that became Lori's. We also had a kitchen with a working refrigerator and a gas stove that had a pilot light, so you didn't need matches to get it going. We just turned the dial, listened to the clicking, and watched the circle of blue flame flare up from the tiny holes in the burner. My favorite room was the bathroom. It had a black and white tile floor, a toilet that flushed with a powerful whoosh, a tub so deep you could submerge yourself completely in it, and hot water that never ran out. The first thing that I noticed about this section was the ascendaton in the first paragraph. It's all underlined in blue. The section where she talks about the lunch and dinner rushes that are exciting, with the lines backing up to the counter, the cashier shouting orders over the microphones, and etc. Then I noticed a contrast between the financial opportunities in New York and Welch. Everything underlined in black has to do with that. It talks about how easy it is to find a job here in New York and how easy it is to find all the opportunities to get these jobs, whereas in Welch was when Jeanette had to act older just to get a job at a jewelry store, or barely had any places to babysit and had to hold 2 or 3 jobs just to help provide food for her family. Whereas now she works one job and is able to provide housing and food and recreation for her and her sister. I also noticed the contrast between the living conditions in Welch and New York. Jeanette seems surprised that she even gets hot water in general, whereas in Welch, you barely got it. It's only if her parents brought in enough money to pay for it. But usually they didn't have that or electricity. So to pay close to the same to what they paid in Welch and get all of these luxuries and necessities that they didn't have before shows the contrast between New York and Welch, which was one of the prime reasons that I chose this passage. And then there's a rhetorical appeal of pathos, anything that's underlined in pink and highlighted. It makes you feel happy for her that she finally has these necessities in life and feel sorry that she didn't have them before. It just adds to that feeling that you had before, that she didn't have enough of anything and now she has everything that she wanted, so you're happy for her. And so it's an emotional appeal of pathos. It didn't bother me that the apartment was in a rough neighborhood. We'd always lived in rough neighborhoods. Puerto Rican kids hung out on the block at all hours, playing music, dancing, sitting on abandoned cars, clustering at the entrance of the elevated subway station in front of the bodega that sold single cigarettes called Lucy's. I got jumped a number of times. People were always telling me that if I was robbed, I should hand over my money rather than risk being killed. But I was darned if I was going to give some stranger my hard-earned cash. But I didn't want to become known in the neighborhood as an easy target, so I always fought back. Sometimes I won, sometimes I lost. What worked best was to keep my wits about me. Once, as I was getting on the train, some guy tried to grab my purse, but I jerked back and the strap broke. He fell empty-handed on the platform floor, and as the train pulled out, I looked through the window and gave him a big sarcastic wave. In this last paragraph of my passage, there is a ascendaton where it says, "Sometimes I won, sometimes I lost." It's showing the simplicity of how easy it is for her to take on the Puerto Rican kids, because she's done it all her life. It's not hard for her. So she's showing how simple it is for her. And the last rhetorical appeal was ethos. When Jeanette moves into her apartment, there are kids around that try to jump her. She has to rebuild her street credit, and her past experience in Welch gives her credibility of knowing how to fight off strangers. So, yep. And this is where my passage ends, on page 248, where the bracket is. And that is the end of my presentation.